Harry couldn't sleep. He'd stopped trying. The dormitory was dark. Goyle's snoring filled the space between walls. Crabbe had kicked his blanket to the floor. Knott's wand light had gone out an hour ago. Normal. Everything was normal. Harry lay still and stared at the green canopy above his bed and thought about a hat. Not an impressive thought, not a revelation, just a hat. An old, patched, unremarkable hat that had sat on his head for 43 seconds in September and changed everything. He'd said, "Not Slytherin," out loud. The hat had heard him and sorted him into Slytherin anyway. At the time, he'd thought it was a mistake, a malfunction, some ancient enchantment gone slightly wrong. He didn't think that anymore. He pulled back the curtain. The common room would be empty now, past 2 in the morning. It was. Green light from the lake pressed through the narrow windows, faint, constant. Harry sat in a chair near the dead fire and looked at the room. He'd sat here every evening for 3 months, slightly apart, slightly behind, watching a social structure organize itself around his absence. He knew the room differently now than he had in September, knew which chair Marcus Flint always took, knew Knott's preferred the wall to a seat, knew Daphne's conversations lasted exactly as long as they needed to and no longer. He knew these things the way you learned a place you lived in but hadn't chosen. Detail without attachment, geography without home. He thought about the hat again. Not Slytherin. It had considered that. He was almost certain of it now. In those 43 seconds there was something, a pause, a wait, a fence of 2 options held against each other. The hat had heard his preference and rejected it, not out of cruelty, not out of error, out of something else. Harry sat with that for a while. The lake shifted outside, the shadow moved through the green light, something large, unhurried. He watched it pass. In Gryffindor, he would have had friends by now. He was almost certain of that too. Ron would have been his first, easy, warm, uncomplicated, the kind of friendship that happened without effort because neither person was watching for it. Hermione would have followed. Different reasons. She'd have needed someone to argue with who wasn't afraid of her, and Harry wouldn't have been. He could see that version of himself clearly, laughing at the Gryffindor table, belonging somewhere without having to think about it. It would have felt like home, and he would have stopped asking questions. He would have stopped noticing things, the way Daphne's expression shifted when she decided someone wasn't worth her time, the way Draco's confidence was borrowed from his father's name, the way Nott watched everything and said very little and understood more than anyone gave him credit for, the way the whole house ran on expectation and obligation and unspoken rule. He would never have seen any of it. He would have been comfortable, and comfortable, he was beginning to understand, was not the same as safe. Somewhere in a building he'd never visited, a file had his name on it, already written, before he'd done anything worth recording. He thought about that, about his father's name in other files, at 16, at 17, maybe at 21, when being in every file that mattered stopped being documentation and started being something else. Snape's words came back without invitation. It defined him, whether he chose that or not. Harry turned that over slowly. Defined, not destroyed. Defined. There was a difference. He wasn't sure yet what the difference was, but there was one. A door opened somewhere in the dungeon corridor outside. Distant footsteps, then nothing. Harry didn't move. He sat in the green-lit silence and thought about what it meant to be somewhere deliberately. Not happily, not proudly, just deliberately. He'd spent 3 months treating Slytherin like something that had happened to him, an accident, an imposition, a sorting error he was waiting for someone to correct. No one was going to correct it. He understood that now. Not because the hat was right about him, he still wasn't sure about that, but because the hat was right about something. He was needed here.
Not in the way the house needed him, not as a symbol or asset or political alignment, needed differently. He needed to see this. The way power organized itself in small rooms, the way expectation became control before anyone noticed, the way silence could be inherited like a name, the way reputation moved faster than the person it belonged to. He needed to see it all, and he could only see it from inside. Gryffindor would have made him comfortable. Slytherin was making him awake. He wasn't grateful for that. He wasn't sure he ever would be, but he recognized it.
Harry stood, put on his shoes, walked out of the common room. The castle was quiet at this hour, portraits sleeping in their frames, staircases still, the distant sound of something moving in the walls. He wasn't sure where he was going. His feet decided before he did. The courtyard was empty, cold now, the kind of cold that came from stone that had held winter for centuries. Harry stood in the center of it and looked up. The sky was clear, stars sharp and indifferent. He could see the tower where the owlery was, the dark sheep of the forest beyond the grounds, the still surface of the lake. Somewhere out there, beyond the forest, beyond the village, beyond everything he could see, people were already deciding what he was, writing it down, filing it, passing it between offices. Harry Potter, 11 years old, Slytherin, notable. He stood in the cold and let that settle over him. Not fear exactly, not anger, something quieter, a kind of recognition. This was the world he'd been placed into, not chosen, placed. And the people who'd placed him here had their own ideas about what he was for. All of them. The Hat, Dumbledore, Snape, whoever sent the man with the notebook, whoever the man with the notebook reported to. Harry didn't know their plans, didn't know which ones conflicted, didn't know who was watching out for him and who was simply watching. He knew very little, actually, but he knew more than he had in September, and he would know more still by June, and more after that. That was something. Not enough, but something. He thought about Draco. That's still a decision. He thought about Daphne. You're not opting out, you're just choosing differently. He thought about Nott, who said almost nothing and understood almost everything. He thought about Ron, who'd looked away across the Great Hall and then come to warn him anyway. He thought about Hermione, who told him the truth when it would have been easier not to. None of them were his friends. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But they were real, complicated, more than what they seemed from a distance. You could only see that from close up, and Harry was close up, whether he'd chosen it or not. The cold settled deeper. Harry pulled his robes tighter. He should go back inside. He didn't move yet. 1 more minute. He stood in the courtyard in the dark and thought about what it meant to stay somewhere knowingly, not because you belonged, not because you'd been accepted, but because leaving would mean seeing less, understanding less, being less awake than you'd become. He wasn't sure that was wisdom. It might just be stubbornness. It might be both. It didn't matter. He was staying. Not for Slytherin, not for the house or the name or the expectations people kept attaching to him without his permission. Just staying. Because he was here, and here was where things were visible. And visibility, he was slowly learning, could cut both ways. Harry turned back toward the castle. The door opened without sound. The entrance hall was empty, lit by a single torch that cast more shadow than light. He walked through it, past the staircases, past the portraits, back down toward the dungeons, back toward the common room, back toward the green-lit underwater silence and the chair he'd sat in for 3 months. He didn't belong here. He'd known that since the first night. He still knew it, but he was here anyway, knowingly now, eyes open. The system had not broken him. It had tried in the ways systems try, through expectation, through silence, through the slow accumulation of pressure until the shape of your life begins to match what people decided it should be. It hadn't worked. Not because Harry was strong, not because he was clever, but because he'd kept noticing.
kept seeing the gap between what was real and what was expected. That gap was uncomfortable. It would keep being uncomfortable, but it was also the only honest thing about this place. And Harry intended to keep living in it. He sat back down in the chair by the dead fire. The common room was still empty, still green, still silent. He closed his eyes, not sleeping, just still. The lake moved outside the window. The castle breathed around him, and the year ended. Not with resolution, not with triumph, not with belonging, just with Harry Potter, 11 years old, Slytherin, awake, still here, still watching, and not going anywhere.